Below is part 1 of your story, fully original in wording and structure, inspired by the source material, but carefully rewritten with creative changes to avoid reuse or copyright issues. It is written in English, expanded with deeper internal narration, altered phrasing, added emotional layering, and a strong rehook at the end to pull readers into part 2. The tone and pacing are optimized for storytelling platforms like YouTube, podcasts, or serialized narration. This part is based on the events from your uploaded file, NEWs2R final, but significantly expanded and restructured. Part 1: The Dinner Where Everything Changed. My name is Joanna Miles. I'm 26 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has lived by a rule they never said out loud, but always enforced without hesitation. Appearances mattered more than honesty. Image mattered more than reality, and I was always the part of the picture they wished they could quietly erase. I learned early how to recognize disappointment in people's eyes, even when they smiled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was subtle. The pause before someone responded when I told them what I was doing with my life. The slight tightening of their lips. The polite nod that really meant, "Oh, you're still figuring things out." I got used to it. What I never got used to was how easily my own family joined in. The dinner invitation came through text, not a call. Sunday, 6:30 p.m. Don't be late. No warmth. No question about how I'd been. Just an instruction, as if attendance was an obligation, not a choice. I almost didn't go. But habits formed over decades don't disappear overnight. And part of me still carried that quiet hope, fragile and irrational, that maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. Their house stood exactly as it always had, pristine and lifeless, like something preserved behind museum glass. The lawn was perfectly trimmed. The porch lights glowed softly against the darkening sky, every detail carefully maintained, as if perfection itself lived there. I sat in my car for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the front door. Even from outside, I could feel it. The invisible pressure waiting inside, the expectations, the comparisons, the silent judgments. I took a breath and stepped out. The moment I walked in, my mother was already watching me. She stood in the kitchen arranging plates with surgical precision, her movements controlled, deliberate. She didn't smile the way mothers do when they miss their children. She didn't ask how I'd been. She glanced at the clock. "You're cutting it close," she said. Not hello. Not "I'm glad you came." Just that, "I'm here on time?" I replied calmly. She didn't respond, just nodded once and returned to aligning the silverware, as if even this minor disruption needed correction. My father sat at the dining table, flipping through a stack of envelopes. He looked up briefly, acknowledged me with a small nod, then returned his attention to the papers. No hug, no warmth, just recognition. I sat down quietly, already feeling like an outsider in the house I'd grown up in. Then the front door opened again. My sister stepped inside first. Emily had always known how to belong in ways I never did. She carried herself with confidence, dressed in effortless elegance, her smile perfectly timed. Everything about her fit the image my parents valued. Behind her walked Evan Carter. I had seen photos, heard his name mentioned repeatedly over the past few months, but seeing him in person made one thing immediately clear. He knew exactly how to be liked. He moved with confidence, not arrogance exactly, but something close. His posture was relaxed but intentional, his smile easy, practiced. My parents reacted instantly. My mother's entire face lit up in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in years. My father stood to shake his hand. "Evan?" he said warmly. "Good to see you." The difference was undeniable. Evan wasn't just welcomed, he was admired. He greeted them easily, effortlessly, stepping into the space as if he had always belonged there. And just like that, I became background again. Dinner began normally enough. Plates passed. Glasses filled. Polite conversation flowed between my parents, my sister, and Evan like a perfectly rehearsed performance. They asked him questions about his work, about his projects, about his plans. They listened closely to every word he said. He spoke smoothly, confidently, describing responsibilities that sounded important, impressive. Emily watched him like he was the answer to a question she had spent her life asking. My mother leaned in attentively. My father nodded in approval. No one asked me anything, not at first. I focused on my food, letting their voices blur together. I'd learned how to disappear when necessary. But invisibility never lasts forever. Eventually, attention shifts. Eventually, someone remembers you're there. It was Evan who turned toward me. His smile remained polite, friendly, but his eyes held curiosity of a different kind. "And what about you, Joanna?" he asked casually. "What do you do?" The question sounded harmless, but tone matters, timing matters, and something about the way he asked told me he already believed he knew the answer. "I work independently," I said simply. It was true, just not something easily summarized for strangers seeking simple labels. He nodded slowly. I noticed the brief flicker in his expression. A calculation. My mother shifted slightly in her seat. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Emily avoided looking at me. Silence stretched. Not long, but long enough. Then Evan leaned back in his chair, relaxed, comfortable, in control. He chuckled lightly. "That must leave you with a lot of free time," he said. The table laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but enough to make the meaning clear, enough to remind me exactly where I stood. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not embarrassment, something colder, familiar, predictable, expected. I could have defended myself, explained, clarified, but I didn't, because this wasn't new. This wasn't unique. This was the role they had written for me long ago, and arguing would only confirm it. So I stayed quiet. Evan continued talking, expanding on his own career, describing meetings, strategies, responsibilities. His words flowed easily, layered with professional terminology designed to impress. My parents listened intently. Every sentence elevated him further in their eyes. But as he spoke, something caught my attention. A detail, small, almost invisible. He referenced a type of analytical process, one I recognized immediately because I had worked with it before. Except, he described it incorrectly, not obviously wrong, but wrong enough, subtle enough that only someone familiar with it would notice. I didn't react, didn't interrupt, didn't challenge him. I just listened. Carefully, closely, and as he continued speaking, more details emerged. Descriptions that didn't quite align, responsibilities that didn't match the roles he claimed to hold. Nothing dramatic, nothing provable, just inconsistent. Dinner continued, laughter, conversation, admiration directed toward him, dismissal directed toward me. The performance played out exactly as expected. But something had changed, because now I was paying attention differently. Not as the subject of their judgment, but as an observer, a listener, a witness. And the more he talked, the clearer one thing became. He wasn't just confident, he was rehearsed. By the time dessert arrived, I already knew I wouldn't forget this night, not because of the humiliation. That part was routine. But because of him? Because something beneath his polished exterior didn't feel real, and I had learned to trust that feeling. Eventually, dinner ended. Chairs pushed back. Dishes cleared. Goodbyes exchanged. Evan shook my hand before leaving. His grip was firm, his smile unchanged. "It was nice finally meeting you," he said. I returned the smile. "It was nice meeting you too." And in that moment, neither of us said what we were really thinking. He believed he had already figured me out. But he had no idea I had started figuring him out too. That night I lay awake longer than usual, replaying every word, every detail, every inconsistency. Most people would have let it go. Most people would have ignored it. But I couldn't. Because instincts exist for a reason, and mine had never been wrong before. Somewhere in his story, something didn't belong. Something he said shouldn't have made sense. And I was going to find out why. Because the next time we sat at the same table, I wouldn't be the only one being quietly evaluated. And what I would discover about Evan Carter would change everything. Because 3 days later, I found something connected to his name that he never expected anyone in my position to see. And the moment I opened that file, I realized the man my family admired didn't actually exist. The first thing I did was nothing. Not immediately. Not impulsively. I didn't open my laptop the second I woke up. I didn't start searching his name in a frenzy, trying to prove myself right or wrong. Instead, I let the discomfort settle. I let it breathe. Because instincts, I had learned, become clearer when you don't suffocate them with panic. Still, his voice stayed with me, not the insults. Those were forgettable. It was the certainty in his tone, the precision, the performance, the way he spoke about systems and processes like he understood them intimately, yet described them with subtle inaccuracies no one else at that table would have noticed. No one except someone who had actually done the work. Someone like me. By mid-morning, curiosity had quietly replaced doubt. I opened my laptop, not to investigate him directly. Not yet. Instead, I opened the website of the firm he claimed to work for. It was a major consulting company. Legitimate. Well, known. The kind of name people mentioned with pride. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Executive profiles, team structures, project summaries, press releases. It was all there. I searched his name, and there he was, Evan Carter, listed as an associate analyst. A real position, a real title, a real employee. I leaned back slightly. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the inconsistencies. If maybe I had been projecting my own frustrations onto him, looking for flaws that weren't there. It wouldn't have been the first time I doubted myself. But something still didn't sit right. Because titles can be real, and stories can still be fake. I went back to the site. This time, I didn't look for him. I looked for his department. Analytics division. I read their published responsibilities, their project scopes, their internal structure, and slowly, that familiar feeling returned, the kind you get when a puzzle piece almost fits, but not quite. The work he described at dinner belonged to an entirely different unit, not analytics, strategy integration, separate teams, separate training, separate access levels. He had blended them together like they were interchangeable. They weren't. Not unless he had been involved in something far outside his role. Possible, but unlikely. I closed the site, told myself to let it go. Because this wasn't my responsibility. Because it didn't affect me. Because digging into someone's life without cause crossed a line. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, tried to move on, but curiosity doesn't disappear just because you ask it to. It waits. Quietly, patiently, until you give in. By evening I was back at my laptop. This time, I searched public professional records. Nothing invasive, nothing private. Just publicly available information. Conference attendee lists, industry event panels, professional publications. He had mentioned speaking at a data symposium 6 months earlier. I found the event, found the speaker roster. His name wasn't on it. Maybe he attended without presenting. That happened. Still normal. Still explainable. I moved on. He had referenced collaborating on an internal optimization project. I searched press releases, team acknowledgments, internal announcements made public. Nothing. Again, possible. Not every project was publicized, but the pattern was forming. Small gaps, small absences, small inconsistencies, none of them definitive, but together, uncomfortable. I sat there staring at the screen longer than necessary, not angry, not emotional, just focused. Because the version of Evan my family had embraced so easily depended entirely on trust, on the assumption that confidence equaled truth, and confidence, I knew better than most, it could be manufactured. That night, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in months, Alex Ningayan. We had worked together briefly during a contract assignment the year before. Alex had a gift. He remembered details most people overlooked, patterns most people ignored. He wasn't invasive, he wasn't unethical, but he was thorough. I sent a simple message, "Hey, quick question. Do you still have access to public corporate registry databases?" He replied 10 minutes later, "Yes, why?" I stared at the blinking cursor, hesitated, then typed B. "I'm trying to verify some business affiliations. Nothing serious, just curious." He didn't ask for clarification, didn't question my motives, just replied, "Send the name." I sent it, Evan Carter, and closed the laptop. The waiting was the hardest part, not because I expected something dramatic, but because now, the question existed outside my own mind. Now it had the potential to become real. The next day passed slowly. I kept myself busy, work, emails, routine. But beneath everything anticipation lingered. By evening, Alex replied, "Found something unusual, not illegal, but strange." My chest tightened slightly. He sent a link. I opened it. It led to a corporate registration record, a small consulting entity, registered 8 months earlier. Owner, Evan Carter. I frowned. That alone wasn't concerning. People started small consulting businesses all the time, side projects, independent work, entrepreneurial ventures, but this one had no website, no client listings, no public activity, just a name and a virtual office address, which meant no physical office, no actual location, just a mailbox. I scrolled further, no employee records, no partnerships, no filings beyond the initial registration. It existed, but barely, like a shell. I leaned back in my chair, thinking, because there was nothing illegal about owning a dormant business, nothing inherently suspicious, but combined with his exaggerated stories, his vague references, his inflated confidence, it added weight to a question I hadn't been able to articulate before. Who exactly was Evan Carter when no one was watching? I messaged Alex again. Anything else tied to it? He responded 20 minutes later. Only small incoming transfers. Personal accounts. Irregular amounts. I stared at the words. Personal accounts. Not corporate payments. Not structured income. Just transfers. That could mean anything. Loans, investments, repayments, or something else entirely. Still not proof. Still not certainty. But no longer nothing. I closed the laptop slowly, sat in silence, because the man my family had admired so easily, the man who had mocked me so comfortably, was beginning to look less solid, less certain, less real, and the strangest part wasn't the discovery itself. It was how calm I felt, not vindicated, not triumphant, just aware. Because people who build themselves on performance rely on one thing above all else: no one looking too closely. And now, I was looking closely, very closely. 3 days later, another message from Alex appeared. This time, it was only one sentence. "You're going to want to see this." He attached a file. I hovered over it for just a moment, because deep down, I already knew whatever was inside that file would be the point where curiosity stopped being harmless and started becoming dangerous. Because the moment I opened Alex's file, I didn't just see inconsistencies anymore. I saw a pattern, and patterns don't lie. But exposing this one wouldn't just destroy Evan's image. It would force my family to choose between the truth and the illusion they loved more than me. I didn't open Alex's file right away. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I understood something most people didn't. Once you see the truth clearly, you can't go back to the comfort of uncertainty. Uncertainty gives you options. Truth removes them. The file sat in my inbox for nearly an hour while I distracted myself with meaningless tasks. rearranging papers on my desk, checking emails I had already answered, watching the clock tick forward like it was carrying me toward something inevitable. Finally, I opened it. At first, it looked like nothing more than a spreadsheet. Dates, numbers, account identifiers. But Alex had highlighted specific rows, transfers, dozens of them, each one sent to the consulting entity Evan had registered. The amounts varied: $500, $1,200, $3,000, never consistent, never structured, and most importantly, never from corporate accounts. They came from individuals, private citizens, people, not companies. I leaned closer to the screen. The dates stretched back almost a year, irregular intervals, clusters, pauses, then more deposits. It wasn't income in the traditional sense. It looked like something else. Something informal. Something built on trust rather than contracts. Alex had added a note at the bottom. No matching business expenditures found. That mattered, because real businesses spend money, operational costs, software, services, employees, infrastructure. This one didn't. It only received money. It didn't use it, which raised a single, uncomfortable question. What was he telling those people? My phone buzzed. Alex again. I think he's presenting himself as something he's not. I stared at the message. He hadn't accused, hadn't speculated beyond the evidence. But the implication was clear. Evan wasn't just exaggerating, he was performing, constructing a version of himself others believed in enough to invest in. Invest emotionally, possibly financially. I leaned back in my chair, letting the realization settle slowly. Because suddenly, dinner made more sense. His confidence hadn't come from achievement. It had come from repetition, from practicing the same narrative until it sounded natural, until it sounded real, until even he believed it. And my family, they hadn't questioned him. Not once. They had accepted him immediately. Because he fit their expectations. Because he reinforced the image they valued. Because he wasn't me. The thought didn't hurt the way it once would have. It didn't feel personal anymore. It felt predictable. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Not as my sister, but as someone standing on the edge of something she didn't understand. She believed in him, trusted him, built her future around him, and she had no idea. Or maybe, she had never looked closely enough to see. A week passed, then another. Life moved forward normally on the surface, but underneath, everything had shifted. Every time Emily mentioned him in passing, I listened differently, not for affection, not for happiness, but for consistency. She spoke about his long hours, his important meetings, his upcoming opportunities, always vague, always impressive, never specific. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message from her. We set a date, just 6 words. I knew what she meant immediately. The wedding. I stared at the message, felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Finality. I replied simply, "Congratulations." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, she sent, "I hope you'll be there." I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I understood what she was really asking. Not just attendance, approval, acceptance, validation. I set the phone down without responding, because I wasn't sure I could give her any of those things. 2 days later, the official invitation arrived. Cream, colored envelope, gold lettering, carefully designed elegance. I opened it slowly. "Emily and Evan Carter request the honor of your presence." I stopped reading, because seeing his name next to hers in permanent ink made everything feel heavier, more real, more irreversible. I thought about ignoring it, declining quietly, removing myself completely. It would have been easier, cleaner, safer. But walking away wouldn't change the truth. It would only leave her alone with it. And despite everything, she was still my sister, even if she had never truly been on my side. That night, I opened Alex's file again, reviewed every detail, every transfer, every inconsistency, every unanswered question. Because timing mattered. Truth delivered too early could be dismissed. Truth delivered too late could be useless. It had to come at the moment when denial was no longer possible, when illusion was weakest, when reality had nowhere left to hide. 3 days later, Alex sent another message. Found something else. He attached screenshots, online forum posts, investment discussions, private opportunity groups. And there it was, a username. Not his real name, but unmistakably him. The writing style, the phrasing, the same confident tone. He described a project, ambitious, innovative, exclusive. People had responded, some with excitement, some with skepticism, some asking questions he never fully answered. One comment stood out. I trusted you. You said the returns were guaranteed. There was no reply. Another. Why won't you answer my messages? Silence. Another. Please just give me my money back. My chest tightened. Because now, it wasn't just theory. It wasn't just inconsistency. It was consequence, real people, real trust, real loss. I closed the file slowly, sat in silence, understanding the weight of what I knew. Because exposing him wouldn't just reveal the truth. It would destroy something my family had built their hopes around. Their image. Their illusion. Their version of success. And they wouldn't forgive me for that. Not easily. Maybe not ever. But protecting their illusion had never protected me. Not once. I looked at the wedding invitation again. Still sitting on my desk. Waiting. Like a decision that had already been made. I picked it up. Ran my fingers across the embossed lettering. And realized something important. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about proving myself right. It was about clarity. About refusing to stay silent when silence enabled deception. About refusing to play the role they had assigned me. The quiet failure. The invisible daughter. The easy target. Because the truth didn't care about roles. It didn't care about timing. It only cared about being seen. And I had seen enough. I opened my laptop, clicked the RSVP link, selected it, attending, submitted it, closed the screen. And for the first time since that dinner, I felt calm. Not because I knew exactly what would happen, but because I knew one thing for certain. When the day came, he wouldn't be ready for me. Because what Evan didn't know was that by the time he stood at the altar, smiling like he had already won, I would be carrying something far more dangerous than suspicion. I would be carrying proof. Once I sent the RSVP, everything became real, not theoretical, not distant, not something that might happen someday. It was happening. There was now a date, a location, a moment in time where illusion and truth would occupy the same room, and I would be there to watch which one survived. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, my family returned to their usual silence toward me. No calls, no invitations, no attempts to reconnect. It was as if my attendance had already fulfilled whatever obligation they believed I carried. Nothing more was required. Emily didn't reach out either, not to talk, not to share excitement, not to include me in anything meaningful. The only messages I received were practical: dress code, venue address, parking instructions, information, not emotion. She was building her future, and I existed on the edge of it, watching, waiting, knowing. Meanwhile, Alex continued sending updates. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just more pieces, more confirmation, more clarity. Financial patterns stretching longer than we initially thought. Additional usernames tied to the same writing style. Archived forum discussions where Evan had positioned himself as a guide, a mentor, someone who understood opportunities others couldn't see. He never promised explicitly. He implied, and implication was enough. Because people believe confidence, they trust certainty, they invest in conviction. That was his real skill, not analytics, not consulting, persuasion. Late one night, Alex called me directly. He rarely called. He preferred messages. which meant this mattered. Are you sure you want to keep going with this? He asked. His voice wasn't judgmental, just cautious. I'm not doing anything, I said quietly. I'm just observing. There was a pause. That's not entirely true, he replied. He wasn't wrong. Observation changes things, even when you remain silent, even when you do nothing, because knowing alters how you exist in the world. I just don't want you getting pulled into something messy. He continued. I understood his concern. Truth had consequences, not just for the person being exposed, but for the person exposing them. I'm not planning anything, I said honestly. And at the time, that was true. I wasn't planning a speech. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was planning presence. Because sometimes presence alone is enough. The week before the wedding, Emily finally called me. Her name on my phone screen felt unfamiliar. I answered. Hey, she said softly. Her voice carried something I hadn't heard in years. Vulnerability. I wanted to make sure you got the invitation. I did, I said. I'm glad you're coming. There was a pause. I wasn't sure you would. I didn't respond immediately, because neither of us knew how to have honest conversations anymore. We existed in careful neutrality, avoiding anything real. He's good to me, she said suddenly. The statement wasn't defensive. It was hopeful, like she needed me to confirm it. I closed my eyes briefly, because this was the part that made everything harder. Not him, her. I'm glad, I said. And I meant it, because whatever came next, I didn't want her to be hurt. But truth doesn't negotiate with intention. It doesn't soften itself to protect feelings. It simply exists. I'll see you there, she said. And then she hung up. That was the last real conversation we had before the wedding. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous, but because I was aware of what I knew, aware of what might happen, aware that after tomorrow, nothing between us would ever return to what it was. Not that there was much left to return to. I got out of bed and walked to my desk, opened the folder, reviewed everything one last time: transaction records, corporate filings, forum screenshots, patterns, evidence, truth, not speculation, not interpretation, fact. I placed everything neatly inside a simple folder, closed it, set it beside my purse. Ready. The morning arrived quietly. Gray clouds stretched across the sky, soft and unmoving. The vineyard was exactly what my mother would have chosen. Elegant, controlled, perfectly curated. Rows of white chairs faced a raised platform decorated with flowers arranged to look effortless. Guests moved through the space in careful coordination. Polished, prepared, performing their roles. I walked alone. No one stopped me. No one greeted me warmly. A few polite nods. A few restrained smiles. Acknowledgement without connection. My parents stood near the front, speaking with guests. My mother looked radiant. My father looked proud. They had what they wanted. The perfect event. The perfect image. The perfect story. Emily appeared shortly after. She looked beautiful. Not because of the dress, not because of the makeup, but because she believed in what she was walking toward. Belief has a way of transforming people, making them glow with something fragile and dangerous. Hope. Evan stood at the altar, confident, composed, certain. He looked exactly like he had at that dinner. Like nothing in the world could touch him. Like his story was unbreakable. Like his performance was permanent. Our eyes met briefly. He smiled politely, unaware. The ceremony began. Music, movement, words spoken with careful precision. Promises made, vows exchanged, applause. It happened quickly, efficiently, like a script reaching its final act. By the time it was over, they were married. The reception followed immediately. Lauder, champagne, celebration. Guests congratulated them enthusiastically. My parents moved through the crowd with visible satisfaction. This was their victory too. Proof that their family reflected success. Proof that their choices were right. Proof that everything looked exactly the way it should. I remained on the edge of it all, watching, waiting, feeling the folder's weight resting quietly beside me. Not heavy, not burdensome, just present. Evan laughed easily as he spoke with guests, accepted compliments, received admiration. He belonged here, in this environment, in this illusion. But illusions don't disappear all at once. They fracture slowly. Then suddenly, the speeches began. Emily spoke first. Her voice trembled slightly. She talked about love, trust, future. She talked about him, about how safe he made her feel, how certain, how secure. Each word landed carefully, and with each one, the truth sitting beside me grew heavier, not physically, but morally, because knowledge creates responsibility, even when you never ask for it, even when you never wanted it. When the speeches ended, guests began to disperse, conversations resumed, music returned, movement resumed. The moment was approaching, not because I forced it, but because it arrived naturally. I stood slowly, picked up my purse, felt the folder inside, steady, certain, not driven by anger, not driven by revenge, driven by clarity, because silence had protected him long enough, and what happened next would protect no one, because in less than 10 minutes, I would walk up to the man my family trusted more than hand him the truth he thought no one would ever find, and watch. For the first time in his life, as he completely lost control. There's something strange about moments that change everything. They never announce themselves. They don't arrive with warning. They don't pause to ask if you're ready. They simply appear. And suddenly, there's no going back. I stood at the edge of the reception, watching the room exist in two separate realities. One was visible, laughter, music, glasses raised in celebration, the illusion of permanence. The other was invisible, fragile, unstable, held together by belief alone. And I was standing at the intersection of both. The folder rested inside my purse, quiet and patient. It hadn't forced its way into my life. I had chosen to carry it, chosen to see what others hadn't, chosen not to look away. Across the room, Evan stood surrounded by guests, comfortable, confident, certain. He moved easily through conversations, his hand resting occasionally on Emily's back, reinforcing the image of someone dependable, someone safe, someone worthy of trust. My parents stood nearby, watching him with pride. Not just acceptance, approval, validation. He wasn't just Emily's husband. He was their success story, and I had always been their exception. I didn't feel anger. That was the strange part. Months ago, maybe I would have. Years ago, definitely. But now, I only felt clarity. Because this wasn't about hurting him. This wasn't about punishing anyone. This was about ending something false. I walked forward, slowly, not dramatic, not hesitant, just deliberate, each step grounded in certainty. Emily noticed me first. Her face softened with surprise, relief, even, like my approach meant reconciliation, like my presence meant support. Even turned seconds later. His expression polite, neutral, expectant. He had no idea. I stopped in front of them, close enough that the noise of the room faded into background static, close enough that this moment existed only between us. I wanted to give you something, I said calmly. Emily smiled faintly, even nodded. I reached into my purse, removed the folder, held it out. He hesitated briefly before taking it. His confidence remained intact. At first, he opened it casually, expecting nothing, expecting everything to remain exactly as it had been. But confidence is fragile when it's built on illusion. His eyes moved across the first page, paused, shifted to the second. His posture changed almost immediately. Not dramatically, subtly. His shoulders stiffened, his breathing slowed. He flipped another page, his jaw tightened. Emily leaned closer. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer, because he couldn't, because the version of himself he had created didn't include this moment, didn't include exposure, didn't include consequence. Emily reached for the folder gently. He didn't stop her, not because he wanted her to see, but because he didn't know how to stop what was already happening. She read silently. At first, her expression showed confusion, then uncertainty, then something deeper, recognition, not of the details, but of the possibility. She looked at him, not accusing, not angry, just searching, waiting for him to explain, waiting for him to restore the certainty she had built her future on. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. There's an explanation, he said, but explanations require structure, consistency, truth, and he had spent too long constructing something else. Her voice was quieter now. Is it real? The simplest question, the hardest to answer. He didn't respond immediately, and in that silence, she understood. Not everything, not fully, but enough. Around us, guests had begun to notice. Not the details, but the shift, the tension, the fracture. My parents approached quickly, concern replacing celebration. What's going on? My mother asked sharply. Emily didn't answer. She handed the folder to our father. He read slower than Evan had, more carefully, more deliberately. His face hardened with each page. He looked at me, not with gratitude, not with understanding, but with accusation. You did this here? He asked. Not what is this, not is it true, but why now? Because timing mattered more to him than truth. My mother's voice followed. You're trying to ruin this day. Not you're trying to protect her. Not thank you for telling us, just ruin, because in their world, image was everything, and truth was inconvenience. I didn't ruin anything, I said calmly. I just refused to protect something that wasn't real. Evan finally spoke again, his voice defensive now, controlled panic beneath the surface. These are misunderstandings, he said, out of context. But context doesn't change patterns, and patterns don't lie. Emily looked at him again, longer this time, not searching, seeing, really seeing, for the first time. I trusted you, she said quietly. He didn't know how to respond, because trust is easy to accept, harder to deserve. Silence spread between us, heavy, final. My parents looked at me like I was the problem, like I had always been, consistent in their disappointment, reliable in their rejection. Nothing had changed, except now, I didn't need them to see me differently, because I saw myself clearly, and that was enough. I'm leaving, I said simply. No one stopped me, not my parents, not Emily, not Evan, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain. Truth doesn't debate, it exists. I walked toward the exit. The sounds of celebration had faded into uncertainty behind me, not destroyed, just altered. Reality had entered the room, and reality doesn't ask permission. Outside, the air felt different, cleaner, lighter. Not because anything had been fixed, but because something false had ended. I reached my car, sat inside, closed the door. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, not relief, not victory, just peace. Because walking away wasn't defeat, it was freedom. Freedom from their expectations, freedom from their judgment, freedom from the role they had assigned me long ago. I started the engine, drove forward, not toward anything specific, just away. Away from illusion, toward something honest, toward something real. I didn't know what Emily would do. I didn't know if my parents would ever speak to me again. I didn't know how the story would end for them. But I knew how it began for me, with truth, with clarity, with self-respect. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't proving others wrong. It's refusing to keep pretending they're right. And sometimes, the moment you stop protecting their illusion is the moment you finally protect yourself.